this idea of deconstruction. They talk about this, I think, at the end. This phrase, like I know you've heard the phrase deconstruction.
Yeah, I know what deconstruction is. Not academic deconstruction.
Not the academic.
Not philosophical.
But you have,
Welcome to Cult Favorite, the unruly cousin of cult podcasts. I'm Merinda Simmons.
and I'm Mike Altman. We're the podcast that has cable TV and gets to watch, cartoons and not just VHS tapes. Right?
What?
The unruly cousin. You said we're the unruly cousin.
Oh, I was trying to put together. Yes. Okay. So we're talking about the Duggars. Shiny, happy people, Duggar Family Secrets.
This is going great already.
We're off to a good start. But the Duggars have an unruly cousin
Yes.
who is able to do things that they were not able to do.
Yes.
Like
watch TV. Watch TV that wasn't.
I just hadn't made the connection.
What do you think the unruly cousin does? All sorts of things. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. She listened to music. She went to homecoming.
Yeah.
She was able to, go to school dances and stuff.
We are two religious studies professors trying to understand all these cult documentaries. You can't stop binge watching.
And to watch cartoons.
And we watch cartoons. I do it. Yeah. If you want to support the show, you can follow us on lots of socials. We are on YouTube now. Wave to the camera. We're and you can find us on TikTok, Instagram. Those are the main places. At Cult Favorite Pod on all of those sites. Do we have a content warning? Yes, we have a content warning.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
This conversation is going to involve discussions about child abuse and sexual abuse. So take care while listening.
Yes.
This is the Amazon 2023 documentary Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. So tell me what you knew about the Duggar family and their TLC show.
I knew about the show. I knew the show existed.
What is the name of the show?
It started at 17?
19 kids and counting.
But was it always 19 or was it 17? Didn't they change the name? I don't know.
I don't know, man.
But yeah.
I think after you get to a certain threshold, a number, I don't know what the number is.
It's 3.
I was thinking 7, the Von Trapp family.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I guess that's just because of classical movie canon. But once you get past that number, whatever the number is, it blurs together. So I don't know. They had a lot of children.
They did, and I knew about the show.
Okay,
and then before all of this stuff broke about Josh Duggar that we'll talk about, I knew about. I knew about Quiverfull. I vaguely knew of this world.
This is a religious movement that they're part of.
Yeah. Of the kind of evangelical homeschool Quiverfull, have lots of kids world. Not where I came from, but sort of adjacent to it, lived in
the same zip code.
Well, you would, evangelical kids who go to public school joke about homeschool evangelical kids because they're weird. They're the weirder ones.
Because they're the unruly cousins.
Yeah, we're the unruly cousins. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We're the ones on the battle lines walking into our secular humanist schools every morning while they get to be, sheltered at home.
Sure.
So I knew of this world. And then around 2010, 12-ish, I was working on some stuff as sort of a research assistant. And then discovered, this is Goddard and IBLP, and this is the stuff behind it.
We will talk about Goddard and the IBLP.
Yeah.
And what that acronym stands for. So I knew that this was a family who existed, but I never watched the show.
Yeah.
And I know about the Quiverfull movement. Here's the scripture that the Quiverfull thing comes from, because I did not know this, and so I wrote it down because I thought it was useful context. As arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of one's youth. Happy is the man that has a quiver full of them. So it's quiver with arrows.
Yeah.
You want
if you ever see
container full of children.
You can see, you'll see them, these big vans that bigger than a minivan, the almost like a school van or a church van. That's like a family's van, and they have arrows for each kid on the back window.
I've never seen that.
Yeah,
I've seen the thing with like the stick figures and like
it's
the
like
descending.
that, but it's like 9 of them or whatever, and they're all little arrows. Yeah,
there's so many.
There's one around town.
Okay, so you remember how when we talked about the garden, and I had like lots of logistical questions about just basic hygiene and things.
Yeah.
I have logistical questions that stump me before I can even get very far in this conversation about just like the mechanics of giant families. I have 3 brothers.
Yeah.
That's a lot, I feel.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I don't know.
So here's what gets covered. This is about the Duggar family. Jim, Bob, and Michelle are the patriarch and matriarch, respectively. Their origins, rise to fame, their values. This is part of the IBLP thing, and their scandals. It's also about the Institute in Basic Life Principles. I always forget the preposition there. Institute in Basic Life Principles, its origins, teachings, and abuses, and the presence of the IBLP in American politics. And this is an offshoot. This is like a subset of evangelicalism, but not a specific church. No. It's an institute created by Bill Gothard, who we'll talk about. And so, the presence in politics, their mission to create a strategic foothold in the courts and legislative offices so as to influence American policy with Christian perspectives. Here's what does not get covered. Like, we only hear from Jill, like among the 19 children, of the 19 children, Jill is the one that we hear from. She's, I don't know, 3rd or 4th in the line. Yeah. So she's one of the older kids. She was one of the stars of a spinoff show, but we don't hear about the other Duggar children. We don't hear from them or kind of what the aftershocks were for them. So here's the summary.
All right.
And I'll try to be short, but I'll also talk about some of the things I want to talk about as we go. So that then maybe I'll just be short later. We'll see. I don't know. It's a moving target. Luckily, we have a quiver full of arrows. So this does follow the usual trajectory of a cult documentary. There's like that summary arc at the very beginning with initial montage of broad appeal. But then like, here's where it's going to go, and it's dark. So this very giant family becomes a reality show darling and serves as ambassadors for the IBLP. But the IBLP is like really strictly disciplinarian. It has very selective homeschooling curriculum. And so there's a lot of stuff about that. And then the eldest son, Josh, is ultimately indicted on child porn charges. So there's lots of cult rhetoric. One of the interviewees, Josh Pease, is a pastor, but he also wrote about the Duggars. He says they turned every father into a cult leader and franchised spiritual, physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. And then one of the former like Quiverfull kids, who was part of the IBLP, said that they operate as a cult in plain sight and that their goal is world domination. So there's 4 episodes. First, meet the Duggars. They are a seemingly very nice, very fertile family. They become a media phenomenon thanks to the TLC show 19 Kids and Counting. There were lots of spinoffs, lots of copycat shows. Yeah. Like we were really interested in the phenomenon of a large family for a while there.
There was
with
a
reality
John and
TV.
Kate plus 8, which didn't have like the fundamentalist religion behind it.
Did they not?
The same way. I don't think so. I don't know. I never watched it.
I don't know. Jim Bob Duggar sees it as a ministry. They're part of this movement that you talked about, the Quiverfull. And that idea of quiverfullness, like there's that scripture. And so they're blessings, but they're also like literally enlarging the kingdom of God on earth.
Yeah.
And that goes hand in hand then with homeschooling, because you want to be in charge of what they learn, how they learn it, and biblically supported patriarchy. We do meet Amy. She's the crazy cousin, self-described. That's her own identification. She is Jim Bob's niece. In 1997, there's a pro-life rally. The Duggars go. They meet the then governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee. And this is where like Jim Bob gets really inspired to go into politics.
Yeah.
He is elected as a state representative twice. He runs for Senate, but loses. But like during that campaign, that's when a photo of the family gets a lot of attention from Parents Magazine. Discovery decides to do a like 1 hour documentary stint, but then that gets some attention. And so they turn it into a show. There is a lot of appeal to this show for different reasons, I guess. I am told.
I feel like you have a harder time identifying with the audience of this show than you did the McMahon documentary.
Right. Well, I just, I try to be self-reflexive of my own participation in a demographic. So Danielle Lindemann is the author of True Story, What Reality TV Says About Us. She is interviewed for this documentary, and she says that there's something comforting about like a show whose like plot point, like conflict, is trying to make enough food. Those mechanics that I was talking about, like pulling back the curtain of this wacky life, that's comforting because there's like real stuff going on in the world. And so, how do I make enough tater tot casserole or whatever?
Well, and that's actually a great book. I've used it in a class before. And like the whole thesis of the book is that she looks at all these different genres of reality TV in each chapter, but the whole thesis is like, we like these shows because they reflect either assumptions we already have or things like they reflect us back to us. And that's why I like to watch them.
And they're very conventional in that way.
Exactly.
So they have, they play out like really traditional understandings of gender roles, for example. And Jim Bob is portrayed as like the luggable, lovable lovable.
Yeah. Lovable lug.
That's what she called him. The lovable lug. And that diffuses his own sense of like the power that he actually has.
Yeah.
And it allows us to find him endearing instead of thinking about the power dynamics that are at work in maintaining a structure where 19 children are that well behaved all the time.
Yeah.
So, this is a direct product of IBLP teachings because kids learn by authority. Parents want to protect them. There is like discipline, obedience, and that is next to godliness. So we hear the news about Josh. This breaks in 2015. There's an anonymous letter to the Oprah show that says Jim Bob did not report these alleged sex offenses for over a year. And that's the end of episode 1. So
this is not the eventual case that takes him down. This is something involving him molesting his sisters first. Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's like episode 1 is this is the appeal of this family and the show and how they came to be, but this is where they're going.
Yeah.
And there's some dark stuff happening inside of the family behind closed doors that involves the eldest son, Josh. And reportedly he's, molesting two of his sisters. That does not come out until 2015.
Yeah.
Episode 2, Growing Up Gothard. We, it starts with this news break. Importantly, I think it's useful to say that in terms of like, Jim Bob keeping it under wraps, there was also a state trooper, Joseph Hutchins, that like gives him a very stern talk, but then lets him go. Hutchins is serving 56 years in prison right now for his own child porn charges.
Yeah.
So Josh is also outed as part of the Ashley Madison scandal, that website that helps married men cheat. And but the episode itself it gets into the background of the IBLP. So we meet some of the former members. We hear about homeschooling, girls who grow up planning to be wives and mothers. Bill Gothard was not a pastor of his own church. So he created this, what he calls an institute and this program, this homeschooling program, but that didn't follow, it didn't belong in one centralized geographical location. It was very diffuse. There is this umbrella structure that he created that sees Christ over a husband over a wife, and they all, of course, play different roles. The wife's job, though, is to be subservient to the husband. And if you get out from under that umbrella of authority, this leaves us vulnerable to Satan's control. They talk a little bit, the documentary talks a little bit about, why this structure came to have a foothold in American evangelicalism. This is in the mid 20th century, after Brown v. Board starts integrating schools. White evangelicals, in some cases, like, wanted their kids to not be part of that compulsory integration. And so we hear about segregation academies and like the rise of the moral majority. Like we have that sort of history inside of like conversations about the rise of the so-called religious right. But in this case, where it is brought to bear is this idea of like what education looks like, and why homeschooling arises as like this answer for Christian parents who want to have say in like who their kids are educated around and what kind of things they're learning.
And who can't, because you have a bunch of independent, Christian schools that spring up at the same time, but they're expensive. So if you have 19 kids, either if you have so many kids, you can't pay, tuition,
private school tuition.
Or if you just can't afford private school tuition, homeschool becomes the other alternative.
1984, Gothard launches the Advanced Training Institute, ATI. This is a homeschool curriculum. It is 3,000+ pages of 54 wisdom booklets. This is not an academic curriculum, it warrants being said, but is more to do with character qualities like wisdom and orderliness and, of course, obedience, largely based on Sermon on the Mount stuff. And it involves a lot of material on gender roles. Yeah. So, like how to, for example, avoid what they call eye traps.
Eye traps.
Yeah. So.
Before there were thirst traps, there were eye traps.
Yeah, right. I mean, what one of the former Quiverfull kids who's now an educator who talks about this movement a lot, what she has to say is that like this creates space for abuse in as much as like if where victim blaming is concerned, like in as much as if you are being abused, it's because you asked for it. It's because that there are all of these eye traps that you've presented. And so what's a boy to do? This also means that older boys in these families are not able to change girl babies. Like they're not able to participate in the domestic labor of taking care of younger kids because they'll be like tempted once they learn female anatomy. So anyway, we also learn about the intense like physical compulsory.
I mean, it's just physical abuse.
So I'm trying to figure out a diplomatic way to say it, but like spanking is a blessing.
Yeah.
Was one of the big ideas. We're introduced to Michael and Debbie Pearl, whose book To Train Up a Child was like legit an instruction manual on how to beat your children and get away with it. We see like old videos of Michael Pearl leading workshops where he actually says, if the child screams too hard with the first 5 like hits and gets hysterical, wait, a little psychological terror is sometimes more effective than pain.
Didn't they show up in the Gwen Shamblin thing too? That book? Am I wrong?
The ideas certainly did.
The ideas did. I don't remember if the book did or not.
I don't remember if it was like them specifically.
Their stuff gets diffused out all over,
for sure,
all over the place.
We even hear about those like the glue stick rule, like don't hit with anything longer or thicker than a glue stick because then whatever. Like here are the things that the police will pay attention to. But your body belongs to the church and its authority, and so it makes sense. And because your body belongs to higher authorities, this is also the kind of moment in time and movement inside of evangelical Christianity where courtship supersedes dating. You'll recall perhaps that book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Yeah. I don't know if we've talked about that.
We talked about it.
We did talk about that. Okay.
Yeah.
But sexual purity is about control, and it's understood in the framework of patriarchal authority.
Right.
So, there's a good like moment of this when the Duggar show plays like a clip of, not a clip. I mean, I guess they had a whole episode of Josh and Anna's wedding.
Yeah.
When Josh gets married, it's this like, 4.4 million people view it. It's really highly rated, whatever. Popular episode. And the officiant, though, says, Anna, placing yourself under the leadership of Joshua and submitting to his authority, following his direction through Christ in your lives, do you commit to trust God with the size of your family? And apparently it was also really common to have like contracts about like spousal behavior that wives would sign.
Yeah.
Anyway, after the allegations come out about Josh, though, TLC cancels the show. Jim Bob wants to keep things going. So they get a spinoff, Jill and Jessa, Counting On. These are two of the older girls. Again, Jill is the one that we hear from. Jill doesn't want to do it, but umbrella of authority. So you can't say no.
Even though she's like a full-fledged adult now.
And married. For sure.
And even within the logic, I think what's remarkable is even within their own logic, she should, like, within the patriarchal system of which they're thinking, she technically should be under the authority of her husband now.
Except that they signed a contract.
Right.
That Jim Bob asks them to sign, that all the kids are signing because everybody's signing contracts all the time. Right. And that's, a thing that commits them for 5 years or whatever to the show.
Yeah.
So, they're also under the authority of the Discovery Network.
Of what Jim Bob has signed.
Okay. So third episode, Under Authority, is very much to do with how this plays out within the IBLP. There are these training centers, lots of different kinds. Alert is another acronym that is for like a kind of militia wing. But the practices at these centers are really sketchy. One person talks about how you would get like locked in a prayer room to, repent if you were disobedient. Shame is a tool that keeps kids in line, and sexual assault is allegedly rampant. Back in like early 80s, Bill Gothard's brother Steve is accused of sexually harassing women and coercing them into sex acts. Bill sends him away to a different like training center with less oversight. Things come to a head because Bill and Steve are confronted by the people working with them, and they're like, this isn't cool. So Bill fires Steve, like they get rid of him, but they come up with this teaching based on Matthew 18 that makes it impermissible to gossip. Yeah. And, in other words, like make allegations against someone hurting you. So this is also part of the Duggars rules. Like it makes abuse really difficult to report. You praise publicly, you critique privately. So
that's not just an IBLP thing.
No.
Like you'll hear that all over the place in American evangelicalism.
I see.
Especially like big like mega churches where it's like, don't go on social media and Reddit and complain about, our churches. But
judgment is still a like good thing, right? Like, isn't judgment kind of an important like behavioral modification tool?
Well, what do you mean judgment of like,
what I mean? Like of like, here's what worldliness is. Right. Here's what godliness is. Here's what,
but
there's good, there's bad.
The outside thing. But like, if you're talking about church leadership or people, like
it has to do with like the world.
Right.
Judgment of the world is important.
Is important,
but
inside you never, like you should never critique the church or publicly. You should always, go to that person, or you should never, Yeah. So it's like a comp. You'll see that all over the place.
You know, another word for this arguably is denial. And that's,
Yes.
We see that when Michelle and Jim Bob are at a workshop where this is after, 2015 when the allegations of Josh are out, and they're talking about it. And Michelle says, I don't feel like I need to talk to Josh. I just need to talk to my Heavenly Father. It's like, don't deal with the situation. Pray about it.
Yeah.
Trust.
There's a whole like rhetorical move of denial that's like, and you see it in the same section where like this is happening to us. Like our family's God has been testing our family. Our family has gone through a hard time.
Yeah, sure.
And so it like externalizes it all.
Sure.
So like it's not Josh has this problem or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like this has happened to us, and it's going to make us stronger or there's a reason for it. But it's like,
come out purified.
But it's a way to completely sidestep responsibility when necessary. Well, not uncommon.
So Bill Gothard is receiving allegations of his own because he's inviting girls to work at the headquarters of the IBLP. And there's lots of heavy petting, allegedly, but one woman also accuses him of rape.
Yeah.
So Bill, again, it's important to note, there's actually like a section in one of his like anger resolution seminar. Cause again, like how the IBLP makes all of its money is to do with the Advanced Training Institute's like homeschooling curriculum. But then there are all of these workshops, seminars and things that people go to because it's not like a centralized church. Anger resolution seminar has a section on why God allows sexual abuse, like with that question.
Yeah.
And
if you have to put that question in.
Oh my gosh. So there are these questions to determine why God lets it happen. Here they are. Are you ready? Will it equip me to counsel others? Will it prepare me for leadership? Will it result in the power of love? This is like what you were just saying about, things happening to you as a way to purify you spiritually and thus strengthen you accordingly.
Yeah.
So physical damage increases spiritual power. Bill ultimately also gets removed from leadership. It takes a very long time, but he's ultimately removed. But his teachings are still what the IBLP is using today. And that episode ends with Kristen Dumais. She's a religious studies scholar who says that it doesn't really matter that he fell because the movement goes on. And the last episode is really about that movement going on. Josh is talking with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force at the very beginning, where they have like infiltrated his work office because they find a folder with like 65 images of child porn. In the meantime, Jim Bob is like, I know this trial is happening, but I'm going to run for Arkansas senator because I need to like get involved with this out of control bureaucracy.
Yeah.
There are conspiracy theories about the woke left, etc. So there is this attempt to get into politics that is unsuccessful for Jim Bob, but really is manifested and materialized and operationalized within the IBLP. We hear about the Joshua generation. I had never heard about that, but it's apparently like this long-standing and long-term plan to like raise up this elite force of Christian homeschoolers who then go to a really specific like college where they are trained.
There's Patrick Henry College outside
Patrick
DC,
Henry College
Virginia.
is the biggest one. Yes. And then they get involved in like high levels of government. So
and that's like bigger than just IBLP. So like
it must be, right?
So
but it's based on IBLP teachings.
Well, so
or it like makes use of them.
I think the main organizers behind it is HELDSA. It's a homeschool legal defense something.
Okay.
And it is sort of the legal, it was
Homeschool Legal Defense Association.
Yes, okay. And it was built to sort of ensure that homeschooling remained legal as states started to, change the laws around homeschooling and what was required to do a homeschool.
Okay, sure.
So like in Alabama, if you're a homeschool, you have to have some sort of what they call cover school, which is who manages the transcripts and make sure, especially with like a lot of these homeschool kids want to go to like colleges, so making sure it has all the kind of administrative stuff that you can't do on your own in that way, organized testing. A lot of those cover schools require you to be a member of HELDSA as part of being in the cover school, because that also helps that if you're a member of HELDSA and say the local school district says like you didn't actually do enough schooling or whatever, and you say they'll defend you.
Gives you like institutional cover.
Gives you a cover. And so they also have this advocacy wing and political wing, of which this Joshua Generation Project is a huge piece. So like not all not all conservative homeschool Christian people are doing HELDSA or doing IBLP. Some are doing classical is this really important, like Sunlight. There's a bunch of them. Okay. But most conservative homeschool Christians are part of HELDSA, then funneling into
Gotcha.
This. So that's your little
it's
institutional map.
It's a larger umbrella.
It is. It's a larger exactly.
Okay, so these kids have like gone on to like clerk for Supreme Court justices and work for people in Congress and FBI and all sorts of things. So we hear about them. Back to Duggar's trial. Josh gets a sentence of 12 years. And this is like the kind of ending sort of where are they now thing. Jill and Derek are on the outs with the family. Same with Amy, the crazy cousin, so called. And Anna, Josh's wife, is still with him. An explanation for that someone gives is that like loyalty can only be proven through adversity. They have like 7 kids of their own.
Yeah.
And 10 women sue the IBLP and Gothard for sexual misconduct. The statute of limitations meant that lawsuit was dismissed. Gothard countersued, asking each plaintiff to pay, like $18,000 or so. The judge is like, dude, no, the plaintiffs are credible. And so I'm not doing that. They take that as a kind of soft win because their voices are heard, their stories are told. And while Gothard did not face criminal, trial or conviction for his actions, they were able to, say what happens. But one of them, Brooke, says that like it was really important for her to confront Gothard there in the courtroom. And what she says about him reminded me, I guess this is like our segue from the Manson family. She says that like it was just a man the whole time. Because initially, she's talking about his appeal and like what an honor it was to be invited to work at headquarters because he was like, I forget what the triangulation was. It was like Jesus and Elvis and Justin Bieber or something. Like all mixed into one was Bill Gothard. And then when she finally confronts him, she's like, oh, he's just a dude. Yeah. And so, once again, we're back to like the mundane way that, people who are regular people end up committing terrible harms. So what'd you get out of the documentary? What do you want to talk about?
What do I want to talk about? I mean, I think, so I didn't grow up in IBLP world, but I've, for a variety of reasons, known a lot of, it's sort of just kind of a lot of ideas that are already in the kind of American evangelical ideascape that just get put on steroids. So there's a lot of things that, like, this was a tough watch for me. There's a lot of stuff here that like was totally resonated. And I think it's one of the reasons why this documentary...
It was a little too close.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the reasons why the documentary was so popular when it came out a couple of years ago. Is even if you weren't IBLP, if you were any kind of sort of like person who came out of American evangelicalism, you could see stuff that's like, and that ring true. So, all right, one question I had thinking about this, because I was thinking about the Joshua generation stuff, is like, not to like, where's the Joe Rogan of the left, but like, there's something about the political effectiveness of how this system, puts these kids as young adults into Congress and into all these places.
They play a long game.
Yeah, that like you don't find on the other side of the political spectrum. And I know there's plenty of reasons for that. Like it's like there's something efficient about authoritarianism at a certain level, but it is made me think like how, like what the way that these groups take child rearing so seriously and culture so seriously. It is a really structurally powerful, as much as it is also like destructive and abusive.
I wonder if that's also, though, partly because there is a narrow definition of child rearing and culture and success and progress and end game that they're working with.
Right.
And so it's much easier to like package it into one thing. We're doing one thing. We have one mission. We are extending it in this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of like, I think that if you have more nuance or just more things that you're working with that are related to like child rearing, well, then it's necessarily more diffuse.
Oh, yeah.
There are lots of things that you might want to work toward that, are to do with like the economy or also to do with world hunger or to do with the environment or to do with like there are, there's not like a central rallying point that has been locked in a narrow way.
No, or even that central, like,
because there are lots of movements and initiatives and things happening on that side of the political spectrum. I just wonder if it's a little more local or diffuse.
No, I think probably true. But also I think it's just, if you're like that baseline, like us versus the world, and like the whole premise is that the world is this terrible place falling apart. And so we have to withdraw from it, hence the homeschooling, right?
But it creates like a really clear, so if the world is, if it's us versus them, there's a clear sense of who they are and who we are.
Right.
And so if you have a really focused and distilled understanding of an us, well, then you're able to move as one body a little more easily.
Yes, exactly. And I think if your kind of politics is organized around larger notions of like inclusivity and a number of different topics, and like, it's not the world, it's not us in the world, it's just me
as part of the world.
Right.
And
like
so what is my way of
a lowercase w world that's it's just a very different way of like seeing things, And
the lowercase w we. Yeah.
That
in the world.
It doesn't give you that same kind of, clarity of purpose.
And clarity then of messaging.
Yeah. Which makes it, but I think, which I think makes it really hard. I think there's a line at one point near the end that one of the ex IBLP TikTokers says, where basically like, as they're all kind of rallying around, like they have a website they start to share these stories of abuse and all this,
right?
Where he kind of says like, we were, now we're online talking about this because we've kind of been like, they kind of equipped the people who could then undo this was the kind of argument. And like, you see that, I think there's a lot of that in the last 5 to 10 years of the idea that like, oh, actually evangelicalism or fundamentalism or whatever you want to call this actually built the people who could undo it by the ones who sort of got out. Right. And, like, have you heard of this, like this idea of deconstruction? They talk about this, I think, at the end. This phrase, like, I know you've heard the phrase deconstruction.
Yeah, I know what deconstruction is. Not academic deconstruction.
Not
okay.
not academic,
not philosophical.
But you haven't heard. So like, yeah, like this is this thing where it's kind of like the whole evangelical term of like people who have left this stuff, who then go through this process of deconstruction of sort of purposefully reevaluating all of their beliefs.
Okay.
With the idea that I have to deconstruct, like, okay, how do I actually think about sex and gender? How do I actually think about hell?
Okay.
How do I actually think about the world? And this sort of, it's almost this sort of like self-done deconversion process. But it's very, what?
Well, it reminds me, I mean, like, is it like deprogramming, like what people call deprogramming like, inside of cult rhetoric?
Yeah, that used to it's like deprogramming, but that used to require like a psychologist that would kidnap you from wherever you were being held by a cult.
Right. But
cult
it's sort interventionist.
It's sort of a self-intervention, but it's also like, I mean, I think the best definition of evangelicalism is all the people who can't stop talking about evangelicalism, which it's a very like inversion of the conversion narrative you grew up on in this fun way. So like funny way, because like
using the same tools to articulate a different message.
Right. Like people who grow up Catholic or Jewish and then don't talk about their deconstruction of their Catholicism. They just don't really go to church anymore and avoid conversation with their parents.
I don't know. Maybe there's a
I haven't seen
wing of the internet that we just don't know about.
Yeah, I don't know. But I just find this whole, so it's there's an interesting world around this whole idea of deconstruction and
makes sense.
Evangelicalism that I'm intrigued by. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I'll be quick. Like, I think that, one of the things that I thought was interesting was the usage of cult rhetoric inside of this documentary, because to your point, the only people who actually talk about the IBLP and this kind of subset of evangelicalism as a cult bent on world domination or whatever are former members of it, and or like Josh Pease, the Christian pastor, who is not a member of IBLP but is still inside the Christian community as one. So it's interesting that there is not, like, I always think that it's useful to pay attention to which of these documentaries call in a, cult interventionist, so-called, or a cult expert, or like whatever the titles are of people who study this stuff or who are an activist inside of that kind of space, who are willing to talk about this religious group as a cult, and which documentaries play on the, I don't know, marketability or just the interest, the cultural interest in something called cults, but who do not call in those people who, I think that there's
rely on the ex-members who want to use that language.
And I think that there's something telling about that, or reflective of a certain kind of priority that keeps, mainline religious organizations from being subjected to cult discourse.
Yes.
And that keeps cult discourse an othering mechanism rhetorically, whereby we create the kind of us's and them's in a broader sense that has, well,
that's definitely what's happening, for the former members. I think, wasn't this also done by the director and producer was also the one for Lula Rich, right? Am I wrong? Did I get that right?
Is that right?
Thought I had that in my notes somewhere. I was trying to find it. Yes. So cool. Julia Willoughby Nason.
Okay.
She produced, directed this. She also produced, directed Fire Fraud.
Ooh.
And Lula Rich.
Let's talk about the Fire Festival. I think that would be a fun summer.
We should do the
summer watch.
We'll do the Nason trilogy, and then we'll be like, "Hi, we've talked about all your documentaries. Would you like to come on our show?"
Right. Sure.
No, but like I think.
Interesting.
It's interesting. Yeah, like that's been her. So she did all three of these, either as a producer or director, and Lula Rich was another one where they didn't bring in cold experts, but a number of the women who got sort of defrauded used that language too.
Yeah.
And that was even less religious. I mean, there's a little bit of Mormonism there, but
I think that there is a way in which the comfort watch of these reality shows and of these documentaries too is also counterposed and reliant upon counterposed by reliant upon a train wreck that we're also tuning in to see. So it's like, you know, whether we find it endearing or infuriating, we're still like, it's a fun trip to the zoo.
Yeah.
Where we are really interested in kind of watching the lives of people whose reality looks different from our own.
Yeah.
And I think
with a bit of a kind of natural disaster documentary where you have these survivors who are like, I got out, you know, and they talk about it in these ways. Like,
yeah. And again, like, take nothing away from, like, this is another thing that I thought was interesting about this documentary. Like, I want to take nothing away from anyone's own capacity or method of telling their own story. Like, use whatever language you want, use the labels that you want, identify it in a way that makes meaning for you. That's what we're all doing all the time to make sense of our own reality. 10,000%. I just think it's an interesting choice at a production level because the ways that different people are telling their story, I don't know. There's not just one way to tell your story. And Jill is a really, really interesting example of that, because while we have all of these ex-evangelicals talking about this as a cult, meanwhile, we have, and again, take nothing away from that. Like, then we also have Jill, though, who is like, I wish I had never talked to Megyn Kelly.
I wish no one had ever heard about
my brother.
What happened.
I wish, in fact, nobody had ever heard about it.
Yeah.
And while she is not claiming that he did not abuse her, she does have a very different relationship to her own narrativizing of the abuse.
Yeah.
Than others do. And I just think that I don't think that one is better or worse. I don't think that I think that that's kind of the point, though, is that there has to be space for a kind of reckoning with that nuance
and I think,
that spectrum.
I think that's where, so they talk about the blanket training, and I think that is this.
Say what the blanket training.
So I think it's this metaphor that's, I think, really powerful for the whole system. So like the blanket training, and they even have Michelle Duggar describing this, where you have a blanket, you put a baby who's like can't even walk yet, right? And you put a toy just out of their reach, and then you say, "Don't touch the toy," and then they crawl towards the toy. You slap their hand.
Yeah, just part of the like early obedience,
right?
Training.
And for me, that's like the whole thing is like they basically are saying this is your blanket of spaces you're allowed to be in because the world is horrible and dangerous. Or the language about, I think, Satan. I don't know if people hear like, or Satan will get control of you if you're outside of these umbrellas.
Right.
That doesn't mean like an exorcism, like an exorcist demon possession moment. It just means like you might get sick. You might lose your job. If something bad happens to you, did you give the devil a foothold? Did leave a place for, right? And so it's a kind of unspecified anxiety about what's going to happen if you leave the blanket, right?
Totally.
And so all that is to say, like, when you think about why Anna stays with Josh Duggar, if you think about Jill's reaction, it's because we all know there's a whole world beyond the blanket,
right?
But even as an adult, that it's been so baked into that point that to imagine a world where yes, Anna could write a book, she could write a book and make millions of dollars, and
financially self-sufficient and able to leave her husband.
But like to be able to do that, you have to have a mental horizon that's even a possibility.
Yeah, sure.
And we kind of had the same thing with Carl Lintz's wife, whose name is now escaping me.
Laura.
We were like, because what else was she going to do? And so they came back and redeemed themselves.
She has a lot to say to that, to her credit. I mean, she does have a lot of, I don't, whatever. She's clearly making her own decision.
Yeah.
But she has they spent a lot of time, with her on camera talking about how difficult that was for her and what kind of decision that was for her. And maybe the same thing was in play.
I think that's her narrating the story in the best way possible. I think she's got a little bit more sophisticated ability to work the situation,
right?
Than the Duggars or Anna.
Yeah,
but I still think that was just more about
maybe
the only way forward is with him still. And so this is the way I narrate the story, because that whole thing was like, that was a very pro-Lentz production.
100%. I just don't want to presume, because, humans are complicated and we all contain multitudes. I just know that there was not, there was something interesting about Jill's relationship to her own story.
Yeah.
That was different from both Anna's relationship to her. Because even though we don't hear from her, we do see her on camera as part of the show, who, for example, they had the cameras there, showing her delivery of her child.
Yeah.
That Jill did not want. Jill had a very different relationship to the cameras and what she felt comfortable with.
Yeah.
So Jill has a different relationship to her story than Anna does, but then also these ex-evangelicals who are really eager to tell their stories in a different,
Yeah.
I guess so.
But that highlights another thing that I wish had been in the documentary more is, and I'm sure there are reasons why there wasn't, but what's up with the role of Discovery in TLC? Mm-hmm. We get some of this from Lindemann, because she talks about Discovery Health was this sort of third tier channel with weird operation documentaries on it, and they put this one documentary, and it does great, and then they get and TLC becomes this sort of lifestyle reality. Mm-hmm. Mecca. I mean, it before for a particular wave of reality TV, sort of pre-Bravo, pre-Housewives. And I would like to have heard more, because so much of this is driven by Discovery and TLC, but we hear nothing from anyone involved. I don't know who produced that show, or how that worked. But I'd be fascinated to know more. It would have been great to have the director or producer of the show talk some. But I don't know.
I mean, I think that's kind of I guess where my takeaway is all related to this in a certain way. 'Cause I think that, sex abuse isn't about sex, it's about power. Right. Yeah. And so to have a nuanced conversation about what is at work in the phenomenon of harassment, sexual abuse, we have to talk about power. Yeah. It's not just about, I think similarly, when we talk about something called cults, it's not about religion, it's about power.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the, under that umbrella, all of these things are contained where, that's to do with how people are telling stories, what the role of producers are in this universe, who gets what kind of airtime in what kind of way. I think that, cults aren't about religion. They're about
Cults aren't
power.
about religion.
That's also why, like, I think that we can, that's also part of what animates the kind of conversations that we have and the kinds of things that we watch in order to have the kinds of conversations that we have.
Right.
And why Lulu Rich is also in this world of discourse.
Well, and I think it gets to why, from the perspective of these ex-IBLP folks,
Mm-hmm.
it is about power, because when they say cult, they mean something with this. They really just mean this kind of authoritarian power structure.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, they're not talking about communes or whatever, or the kind of some of the,
Well, one person even makes sure to distinguish, like, the IBLP this is not Christianity.
Yeah. I mean,
and again, like, I understand why that distinction is useful to make for someone who needs to, kind of keep certain things. But when we make those distinctions and when we don't, again, is always interesting to me. And what, what Josh Pease says, this pastor, and also they think that his, like, description was like pastor / journalist or whatever. He wrote a piece about the Duggars. I have not looked it up. I don't know if he writes other things too, or if that was, but he talks about Gothard as, a playbook of a powerful narcissist and a dynamic with no institutional checks and balances in place. And, like, ultimately, it was just a man the whole time,
That seems to be where a lot of these end up.
That's kind of my, through line.
I think, I mean, for me, I guess I have kind of two takeaways. One, I think the big one for me was thinking about the kind of comparison, like, what happens when you put Bill Goddard alongside someone like Yogi Bhajan, who has, like, these similar institutions, like these places that kids are going, this influence on parenting and how you should parent, right? And so how one, and builds this sort of network of things, and there's a lot of interesting comparisons, and it kind of raises a lot of questions about, to the ways that 3HO was forced to, like, come to terms and settle and, like, deal with this stuff in a way, and the way IBLP has not. But part of that is probably tied up with the fact that, like, Yogi Bhajan, the people like that was operating in this new age spirituality kind of sphere that was very different, and that, like, I think had a whole lot of other competing ideologies, whereas we talked about the blanket of sort of IBLP.
Right.
And then I think too, like, there's, it's hard to not see how the seeds of kind of American authoritarianism on the right were planted long before. I mean, here in the 80s, ATI starts in 1984.
Sure.
So there's a long running academic argument. There's a American church historian who wrote a book, The Democratization of American Christianity, with this argument that, like, evangelicalism in America and is always about the sort of democratizing, grassroots sort of individual liberty. It's about an individual experience, individual conversion. And there's always been a pushback of, like, but, like, look at all these structures that have been throughout American history, like, not just now. And I think for me, this was another piece of evidence sort of saying, like, that yes, maybe there was democratization in certain ways, but also it seems to often drive back to authority and a kind of authoritarianism.
Right. Well, I mean, like, initially the idea of evangelicalism and, Pentecostalism as, like, as something that you could access and be part of and be influential in without having to have some kind of high church literacy level, education level. Like, created a different understanding of how authority works. But
until it didn't.
Yeah, I
know?
mean, people are still gonna people.
Right.
I guess is the thing that like, yeah, people will, into a vacuum. Folks will figure out how to cultivate, collect, maintain, perpetuate power dynamics.
Right. And I think it's a lesson about trying to treat things that we categorize as religion as somehow operating with a different set of social rules than the rest of things. Right. I mean, it's just because,
Sure.
Like, we don't ask about the democratization of American sports or the democratization of America, whatever, right? Like, we could look at those things with the same lens, but that's not like a pertinent question that people spend a lot of time on. There's something about the idea that like Christianity in particular, but religion in general, is supposed to somehow be like liberating and free, and that.
Well, I think it's about the extent to which you think that democratization is separate or inextricably linked to privatization.
Yeah.
Like, and now those two things have, like, those two things that might have once seemed like contradictory or even anathema to like mutually exclusive,
Yeah.
If something is democratized, well, that's not privatized. That's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Well, now that's kind of a Mobius strip, and we have no trouble making the shift, or that doesn't even feel like a shift, that like democratization is about private property, private, profit structures, whatever.
Yeah.
And so there's I think that plays a big part of it. And so in as much as religion inside of a US context is privatized in lots of ways, it makes, a kind of monetary sense that like the way in which it is democratized is also privatized. Like it's two sides of the same literal and figurative coin.
Makes sense.
Anyway,
what's your cult favorite?
Well, I guess speaking of complicated families, but maybe with a happier ending. I don't know. That's an awkward segue. But new to me is the fact that there was finally a documentary made about Liza Minnelli.
Ooh.
It was last year, but I only just discovered it and watched it. It's called Liza, a truly terrific, absolutely true story. And it's a pretty conventional documentary. Like it's really straightforward, and there are no surprises, but it's still a delight to watch because it's Liza Minnelli, and I'll watch anything to do with Liza Minnelli, and important cameo from Anne Pellegrini. Religious studies and performance studies scholar.
Yeah.
Anne Pellegrini,
she shows up
Pellegrini came to our department one time to give a lecture and talked in my seminar, and it was just so wonderful. Talked about hell houses, that phenomenon inside of, anyway. And I was watching this documentary and I was like, what's up there, Pellegrini?
What was Pellegrini's
to do with like performance studies.
Okay.
That aspect of their scholarship was
wow. That's amazing.
Anyway, and psychoanalysis, like performance studies and psychoanalysis is Pellegrini's primary wheelhouse, but has done important work in religious studies as well. So Liza, a truly terrific, absolutely true story.
Wow. Okay. So
is available now.
I have a similar but very different cult favorite.
Okay.
So this past weekend, as the Theater Tuscaloosa was doing a fundraiser for our local food pantry.
Yes.
And my friend Carol DeFelice starred in the one-woman show Irma Bombeck at Wit's End, which I had never seen.
Okay.
Didn't know that much about Irma Bombeck, but it's a remarkable little 1 hour show. So, and it was to hear, it's a really, so Bombeck was very involved in the campaign to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s, and was also a sort of columnist and humorist, and it's basically a monologue of her recounting her kind of story from most of her adult life, not much of her, and it was great, and Carol did a great job and raised a bunch of money to feed people. But it was
marvelous.
That if you get a chance to see that play, go see it or read it or find out more about Irma Bombeck. That was my cool favorite. So
great. I love that you've just discovered Irma Bombeck. There's
really, a ton of. This is what I've.
My grandma was really into Irma Bombeck.
I used to hate not knowing things because but now it's my favorite thing ever is realizing how little I know because I get to discover new things.
100%. You're on the
Yeah.
On the other side of the looking glass where curiosity becomes a fully embraceable.
Just fully own your ignorance and then.
Oh, I'm with you.
Yeah. The whole thing. So, but you should go out there.
Don't take my word for it.
Well, I was gonna
see a show.
I was gonna say don't let other people be ignorant of this show. Tell people about our show.
Oh.
So I was
That's good.
segueing.
That's
I was
good.
working on a segue, but I couldn't find my notes.
Do not let me interrupt. Excuse me.
Yeah, but subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching it now. Leave us a rating, a review, a comment. Find us on the socials. Take somebody's phone.
Oh my gosh.
Download all of our episodes.
Enough.
Special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies. And we're in a very quiet building now that classes are over.
It's true.
And yeah, we'll see y'all in
See you next
2 weeks.